I guess to start out, I'd like to talk about, why banning books. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. I think it's sort of antithetical to what a democracy means. But one thing I would like to emphasize is there are obviously certain books that are not appropriate for adolescents, and adolescent readers tend to move all over the place and start to try to define what it is they think through their reading, and so perhaps a book like Lolita could wait until a person's an adult. The book I'm speaking about, In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, is actually assigned in a lot of high school classes, and even though it's uber violent and talks about the dark side of humanity, it's also an incredibly well written book, and a book that that dispels myths about America in the 1950s that have become sort of dangerous, I think. The idea that in the 1950s we had sort of a golden age where anyone your children could walk to school without having any sort of problems, if they wouldn't be attacked by anyone, and that there was this perfect time when everyone just sort of lived a perfect life, and it wasn't true. There were two Americas in the 1950s, and Truman Capote manages to bring those two together, which I'll come back to in a minute. I think that one of the main things that the book does for people who really pay attention to it is destroy the American obsession with happy endings, with an inability to face tragedy in stories, which is one of the more human elements of, I think, of stories from the beginning. The oldest novel we have is the Iliad, which is actually a tragedy. So it does not end well for the majority of the people in the novel. And Cold Blood is the same thing. Also, as I said before, I think what it does is show you that there was another world in the 1950s beside that of the perfect family, and those two come together in the novel. I sort of call this the Disneyification of American society, that everyone expects for it to be the Little Mermaid, and that the people fall in love at the end of the story and everyone lives happily ever after, and it just does not work that way. I guess back to the 1950s myth, I think that what we tended to do in the 1950s is to ignore the racism of the 1950s and to ignore the segregation and to only focus on the sock hops and the birth of modern American music and Elvis and that sort of thing, and ignore that there were people from broken homes. There were people from a darker side of the country who had a totally different existence than did those people who enjoyed the happy ending type life. And also, I think, though, that there was already an obsession with something that Truman Capote tapped into with this and sort of invented a higher level of it. That is that there was already an obsession with crime novels. I remember my older aunts in the 1970s reading what were called true crime novels, and also magazines. There was a true crime magazine, and then there was the film noir obsession of the 1950s, 40s and 1950s. Those were an attempt to look at crime and even at drug addiction and at murder and those sort of things, the seedier side of life, but to make them entertaining. What Truman Capote did was take the same genre and make it high literature. So that's the difference, that he actually turned it into a book that could probably stand the test of time and be read for generations. And in particular, he also invented a new type of field, the journalistic novel, which is to thoroughly research a real topic, but to use fictional writing to present it so that you have a story that people actually want to read. And in my field of history, that's incredibly important because it's a method for passing history on to non-historians, to people outside of the field that just don't want to read what we write. He spent 6 years in a small town in Kansas where there was a murder of a family, a father who was a leader in the community, a Methodist, a deacon, and a man who had pulled himself up from poverty to have one of the biggest farms in the state and to be incredibly wealthy. His wife, who, by the way, Capote really did a major amount of research and did not present her as the perfect American housewife. She was depressed and spent much time in bed ignoring her family when she was in that state, and he actually addressed that the time was not a perfect time for women to live. And then the perfect daughter and son, who was a little more frivolous, but the daughter was the darling of the town, dating one of the most handsome boys and one of the athletes of the town. They expected that to last forever, but then when he read her diary, when Capote did, she was about to dump the boyfriend and had higher aspirations beyond what a woman was supposed to do at her time, to become educated, to be more. And then you bring in the two murderers. And the crazy thing I think about the novel, to put it in modern language, is that he makes you feel sorry for them. He makes you empathize with them and almost put yourself in their shoes until they commit the murder. and then you're allowed to come back and despise them. But at first you have to engage the beatings of their youth, their horrible way that they were brought up, and the fact that they really felt lost in an America where other people had everything. So the Clutters whom they murder had the perfect life, although they earned it. The father worked very well to get it, and these men were quite jealous of that lifestyle, and I think it gets at why the murder is so violent. And I guess just in closing, I suspect that the reason that it's banned are two reasons, and it actually has been banned as recently as 2007, I looked that up, are probably the uber violence, probably the fact that there are people who are uncomfortable with, with reading a novel about 4 gruesome murders, just horrible murders. And then on top of that, I think that perhaps the fact that Truman Capote was gay, and not just gay, but incredibly open about his homosexuality at a time when that was not popular. However, I think that there's probably a ray of hope in that regard, because there have been 2 Hollywood movies made about the writing of the novel, which are essentially the same movie. I think Shameless was one, and then Capote was the other, with Philip Seymour Hoffman. And they're both exceptional movies, and they get at the relationship he developed with people in Kansas, and with the personal relationship he had with one of the 2 murderers, which almost became a romantic relationship. A difficult movie to watch, but one that humanizes Capote, probably for people who would never have considered Capote a person that they would think that way of. On a final note, I think that the book is incredibly important for young writers, because it's a writer at the top of his game. It's the best book that Capote wrote, and really he did nothing afterwards. He didn't finish his last book, and sort of slipped into a life of drugs and alcohol after that. But the important thing about the novel is that it's incredibly concise, that there are very few sentences that require more than 1 piece of punctuation, and yet it's completely vivid without using many adjectives, and actually of stretching language out. So it's quite a lesson for students in how to keep their language concise and to write appropriately.